Hello and welcome to another episode of the Unbound Theatre podcast, Tell Great Stories. My name is Erika Sanderson, and today we are going to be talking about something that's very, very close to my heart, or rather I should say a character that is very, very dear to my heart. Professor Chronomier, who was created back in 2019 by Dario and Gareth. And Dario, tell us about the Professor, how she first came into being.
Well, yeah, she was created, as you say, for Lost in Time, which was a project we worked on for Aylesbury Town Council. And the way that came about, it was an official commission. We have to thank Ruth Mayhew from the Town Council for that. Ruth's been a fantastic supporter and friend of Queen's Park and Unbound, as have Aylesbury Town Council themselves. And we've been working with Ruth for a while now. We started off at events that she organises for the council. She's their events officer. So if you live in Aylesbury, you're bound to have heard of the Soapbox Derby or Aylesbury on Sea, Park Life Weekend, Festive Family Fun, Carol Fest. Those are the events that Ruth and her team work on. And we'd been there with Queen's Park for about a year or so, running free craft activities. And we'd started to explore ways of getting Unbound involved as a project. So we'd gotten a commission to perform, I think the first thing was Wind in the Willows, which was part of Aylesbury on Sea in 2018, so the year before we did Lost in Time. And that had gone down very well. And we'd been talking over ideas with Ruth about what we might be able to do in 2019, and those are the projects that became Tudor Tales, Treasure Island, and Captain Christmas, which we performed at different events throughout the year. And at the end of 2018, I think it was probably about the time Panto was up and running, I seem to recall, Ruth approached us about working on an interactive project, what she wanted, about Aylesbury's history. And the council had commissioned walking plays before, which took place in the historic part of the town centre, round about St Mary's Church, and the old part of town, as it's called. And they were sort of essentially murder mysteries and mystery plays, which Erika and Gareth are both in at various points. And Ruth was keen to redevelop the project, and rather than having them something that was wholly fictional, she wanted something that was rooted very specifically in historical events and characters that were part of Aylesbury's heritage. In other words, I suppose she wanted them to be more educational. And because we'd had a very positive working relationship with Ruth and she liked what we were doing, she asked us if we would take it on. And it took a while to figure out the format of it, because we realised it was effectively a reboot of a previous project, and we didn't want to just carry on something that had been happening. We wanted to make it feel completely new, and for audience as well, we wanted them to think, oh, this is something different. So we discussed ways in which we could differentiate it, and the key ideas were, we wanted to make it more light-hearted, whereas they'd been slightly more sort of Victoriana and murder mysteries and mystery plays. So we wanted that was light-hearted and kind of an adventure, really, as opposed to a mystery. And the big difference was to move it indoors rather than go back to the same route that had been used previously. And it's not a massive leap of logic. I think we've spoken before on the podcast about necessity being the mother of invention. It's not a massive leap to think we need a venue that's linked with history, that's got plenty of space to walk around, because the council didn't want it to become a sit-down play. They wanted to keep the element of walking and moving around from space to space. So you need a historical setting where you can move around, and it doesn't take a genius to think, well, what about the museum? And the other deciding factor, which sort of led to the Professor and the project in general, was that we were sort of aware that in a way this was going to be possibly a last roll of the die for the walking plays. The council wanted to do something different. They wanted to just reinvent it as something educational and informative. And if it worked, then great. We'd hopefully do more, and that is the plan. But if it didn't, then no hard feelings. At least we tried. So taking it as possibly as a bit of a one-shot deal, we might only get one chance of doing this. I thought, well, rather than linking it to one particular bit of Aylesbury's history or one particular event or character, let's just cover as much as possible and fill it with as many facts, because the remit, and I think this was even in the wording of the booking form we got, was that we had to do something that led the audience to walk away saying, I never knew that before. So if you've got a show, you're in a museum, you're moving around, and you want to do something that covers lots of different time periods and lots of different historical stories, then it, again, not a great leap of thinking to come up with a story that's going to be around a time traveller, and that's pretty much where the professor came from almost immediately. Was she was there in my head, and that's what I went back to Ruth with, and we pitched as the project. It was a time traveller who's lost their time machine, and we took it from there, really. And I have got one last thing on the sort of the genesis. I've done something hitherto unheard of in these podcasts. I've done some research, and I have somewhere
on your own work.
on my own work, because I have, as is known, I have one of the world's worst short-term memories. So I've gone and looked up my notes on, and I read it out because Erika, you'll like this. And these were the very first notes we had before we kind of had it commissioned and before we started work on a story and it had all been signed off. And it says ATC, Aylesbury Town Council, History Play, May 2019. An immersive, informative theatre show touring Bucks County Museum. And then there's a synopsis, and it says, Professor Astrid Chronomier has lost her time machine. So she had a different name, but I clearly didn't have much faith in it because I've written Chronomier above that with a question mark. So didn't have much confidence in that being a name. So Professor Astrid Chronomier has lost a time machine. Specifically, someone's stolen it. As a result, ghosts of the past walk the corridors of the present. Professor Chronomier needs your help to follow a trail of clues that will reunite her with a time ship. Are you ready for the challenge? And then there's a list of sort of characters to include, some which we did include, like John Hampden and Civil Soldiers, some which we didn't. And then at the bottom of the page, it says, and I'd already changed the name by now, Erika as Chronomier, a la H.G. Wells. So that's how she came to be, really. And we went away, the commission got taken up, the council were happy with it, the museum agreed to do it, and then we started, and it was a quick turnaround as well. I think all of that would have been in December and early January, into January 2019, and then we performed it in May.
Because I remember I got an email from you just sort of outlining the project, and you described this rather eccentric character, larger than life time traveller, and just said, fancy playing her? And it was like, yes, please. And it all just kind of kicked off from there. So you and Gareth ended up by producing the first script together that was Lost in Time. So
Yes.
how did that all come together? What was the working relationship between the pair of you like? Who comes up with the jokes and who comes up with the history bits? Or is it not like that at all?
No, I mean, I'd gone on a recce of the museum with Ruth, again, must have been some point in January 2019, just to remind myself of ourselves, really, of what the different spaces were and a rough idea of the route. The great thing about the museum is it's a bit of a rabbit warren, so you can double back on yourself, and Ruth was very keen about the professor as a character always kind of coming and going, disappearing out of different rooms. So I'd had a bit of a heads up on the museum and what different areas there were, and then I recall, I think February, Gareth, the two of us then went on a Saturday morning round the museum to then start piecing it together.
Yeah, I remember sort of when you first sort of brought me into the project, and the thing about necessity being the mother of invention, I think, was really, really key to the Lost in Time sort of writing process. Because I remember one of the first things you sort of said was, there's this list of things it's got to be. It's got to be educational, it's got to be interactive, it's got to involve the museum, directly in what's happening. And when you sort of first hear that, it sounded like, oh, wow, there's this big list of restrictions on what it can be. That's really sort of restricting. But the more we looked into it, the more it sort of really pushed us down a route of making something really quite interesting. And I wonder if we hadn't had that impetus of all of those, restrictions and pointers, whether we'd have come up with something completely different.
Yeah, I would, because it was written not necessarily specifically about the museum, but certainly using its exhibits in certain spaces as a jumping off point.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you, what came first, like the route or the characters?
Well, the Chronomier was there
plots.
from the off, and the idea of it's about a time traveller who's lost her time machine and needs your help to get it back. So I think before we really went very far into the planning, that was always there as the basic plot. And the notion was you were moving around the museum and you were obviously doing something that was going to help you get the time machine back, either finding bits of it or following clues to take you around. So that concept was always there, and then it was populating it with characters that had a connection with Aylesbury, and some of those did come from the museum as we walked around. Others were I'd done a little bit of reading on Aylesbury's history, so I'd found out from that. I think that Queen Victoria had visited, so that was, let's put her in there. We knew before that about the connection with Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. There's a civil war. John Hampden, there's not really a lot of stuff about John Hampden in the museum, but he's one of the most famous figures connected with Aylesbury. So it was a bit of a mix. It was partly just researched generally about what are the kind of tentpole stories and figures from Aylesbury history that we should include, and what are the elements in the museum that we can then connect to. And I think there was a bit about a mammoth, because there was an exhibit about that in one of the galleries, and we put in a bit at Ruth's request about the painting, which is called, is it The Jury?
The Jury.
I think it was, yeah.
I had a really, really big speech to learn about that filled me with fear. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so that was definitely Ruth. Ruth said, we've got to make sure that's in the play, put something in about that. So we tailored
You gave me a
it.
monologue about a painting, about all of these dignitaries of Aylesbury that I had to learn.
Yes, there's a lot of information about that. There's biographies of all the different
Yeah.
people. So we set up that I think the professor has met them and has had some sort of encounter with them in the past.
Yes, I can't remember whether a part of her costume was made by one of them or something like that. I might have made that up, but I remember that like they all had, you know, professions and stuff, and so I think they'd all made various bits for her at one point in the thing.
I seem to recall there was a series of puns, weren't there, about bakers and butchers, and there's a bit of back and forth between the professor and Astrid, I seem to remember. So yes, the plot was there already, and then populating it with figures were mostly just from general research of Aylesbury, but some were from the museum, and then it was working out which order you met them in which part of the museum. And I remember Gareth and I, we did a walk around figuring it out where you could go. Yeah,
we had almost like a blueprint of the layout of the museum, and then sort of I remember sort of drawing little routes on it and kind of going, that's where they meet this, that's where they meet this, and then we got sort of the stairwell where they would overhear, and we sort of knew that was a great place for someone to overhear something, but didn't know at that stage quite what it was going to be. And then obviously when the great train robbers came in as well, and sort of became as close to an antagonist as you could get, that was when a lot of the sort of structure of the plot, you could now say, okay, we've now got a thread that's going to happen. We know why the professor's looking for her time machine, because I think at first she had lost the machine, and we sort of didn't quite know how she was going to find it, what the struggle was going to be. But then when the train robbers came in, and the idea of them using the machine to escape, from that we could then sort of start building a real thread of a plot. And once you had that basic thread, you then could start bringing in, okay, this happens here, this is plot related, this is interaction related, and sort of build it up from that point. Yes,
the train robbery was the element, you're right, that gave us a bit more of a story to it, because you're moving between each gallery or each room in the museum, and so naturally it's a little bit sketchy in the sense of there's a little vignette in each one, and you meet someone different, so there's always a historical figure. And we tried to make sure that in each room there was a little bit of an interactive element, whether it was a little quiz about something that we talked about previously in the scene, or whether there was I think we had a joke telling competition to make Queen Victoria laugh. There was a sing-along with the Civil War soldiers, everyone sang Greensleeves. So we were looking for these ways of getting the audience to really interact. But yeah, the train robbers gave us a bit of momentum towards the end, that they'd stolen some of the crystals. Every room you went to, you had to try and find a crystal that helped. I think it was, they all were part of a scanner that the professor would then be able to use to find where the time machine had gone, because I think, wasn't it that she had left it with the handbrake off or something, and it had disappeared?
It wasn't the professor, it was Astrid.
It
definitely was not the professor.
The professor said it was
Astrid.
Astrid.
Yes.
Oh, come now, dear boy, as if I would do something like that.
And so that was the basic format. It wasn't very plot heavy, it was very much interaction heavy, but it had a good plot at the end, so there was a story to resolve. Whereas I'm sure we'll talk later about Laws of Time, which is hopefully going to be the sequel when we can get around to being back and doing that, is much more plot driven, still with the interactive element.
But what I think was great about of Lost in Time was the sheer sense of fun that came from it. Like the interactions, the characters, it was all just really rooted in, this has got to be fun, this has got to be exciting. And particularly because there was a slight element, I think the council wanted to aim it more child friendly as well. And the sense of sort of just fun adventure that came from it really sort of shone through in that project. And I think that then also becomes a bit of a counterpoint to Laws of Time, where we sort of realised we'd done that fun adventure one with lots of interaction and lots of, interesting stuff happening. And now we wanted to really dive into the plot and the characters and do something that's a lot more plotty. Which I think will be a great sort of counterpoint to Lost in Time, which was just, rooted in fun.
I mean, especially during the rehearsals as well. It's definitely been one of the. I just remember laughing a lot during the rehearsals. Everything from how we put it together physically, where we had this massive whiteboard, and it was like something out of some kind of bank robbery, like Ocean's 11 or something, where you'd have this massive diagram with arrows everywhere. And I think even at the point the characters were colour coded with who had to run from each room. And we're in the theatre where we've got some boxes to represent doorways and different rooms. It's like, right, okay, let's try and map out where everything is. But yeah, I just and even some of the production photographs from that, you see me and I'm literally just like giggling my head off in some of them. Like the thing with, I'll never forget the first time we trialled one of the joke props, which was someone smashing a painting over someone's head.
Oh yeah, it was Matt as the Saxon, I think, got hit with a
Matt
painting.
As the Saxon with the painting, and I think Hannah just crashed it through, and his head just went straight through the paper, and we all just, it was the first time we'd done it, and we all just looked at him, and Matt just had this incredible expression on his face, and we all just burst out laughing.
Yeah, it was great.
And Alistair as his Roman soldier making it. Did he make an entrance from one of the lifts?
Yes, it was.
Did the doors of the lift open?
Yeah, we because Ruth was again very keen about this thing of characters coming and going. So that was where the character of Astrid really came from, because the prof had to be coming and going, running out of one door, and then the next time you see them, they're somewhere else completely. And so you needed one character who was anchoring the audience, so to speak. But we were kind of looking for ways of interesting and funny ways for characters to walk in. So sometimes you walk in, they're already there, but they've got a lift in the museum right next to the gallery where we were doing one scene. And we just thought, wouldn't it be really funny if you rang the lift and said, well, let's go upstairs and see if we can find the next crystal, or go and follow the next clue. And then you open it and there's a Roman soldier stood there. And it connected with the Lembra Horde as one of the exhibitions. And then it's one of those bits of casting where you go, as soon as you need a Roman centurion, no one else can do that but Alistair. He was so perfect as this soldier who was looking for his coins and was frustrated that someone had locked them in a giant cabinet. So yes, that was great fun. It was kind of, like you say, Gareth, the tone was much more light-hearted and silly in a good way. I mean, childlike, not childish.
Yeah.
It was really fun to have characters popping up.
I would say it was like a family adventure, really.
Yeah, it was.
Where you get
It was really good fun. It was a good ensemble that we got together, and I think particularly it probably overlapped with Antony and Cleopatra, which we talked about last time. And so it was kind of fun to go from something that was high tragedy to something that was a real fun running around comedy. But how did you, Erika, because obviously I roped you in to play the character. What was your reaction when you got the script for the first time?
When I got the script, I loved it. I think I even emailed you and said that I've got to page 2 and she's already making me laugh. So I felt like an instant warmth to her. And the more I've played her, the more and more I really do take her to my heart. I am incredibly protective of her. And I have loved playing her throughout, Lost in Time and all of the audio stuff that we've now done as well. But yeah, when you first gave me that, there was just something about her love of life and history and her sense of adventure, and that kind of really sort of gearing up the audience as well. She was very much like a driving voice, like, right, come on, this way, and off we would go like a rocket. It's got to be one of the most, it was only like half an hour show, but it's one of the most exhausting ones I've done, because I spent so much time running, or if I wasn't running, then I had to have that energy to kind of burst into a room and then drive the audience on, because we were walking around the whole building. I'll never forget during the shows that there was one bit you talked about popping in and out everywhere. where I had to leave from one door and then literally run out the front door, across the courtyard, through a garden, and pray that a back door to the museum was unlocked and that I could get back into the building to run up 2 flights of stairs to make a very calm entrance on another floor. And there was also a massive window that I had to try and time it so that people couldn't see me running across said garden.
Past it, yeah.
They were walking past it at almost the same time, so I had to leg it, dash across before they got into that room, and then my heart was going, and I would always think, did they unlock the door? Did they unlock the door? Because we still had people in the museum at the time during the rehearsals, and I think there was one point where I ran up to it and rattled the door, and it was like, well, it didn't open. Like,
yes, because we overlapped, I think, just as they were closing. They would close at 4, and our first performance was at 4:00, so there would be a little crossover, and because they had to get all the general public out before we began, they had to close all the doors and lock them to make sure no one was sort of sneaking back in. And then we were doing a last little run through, and we suddenly went, oh no, all the doors are locked. But fortunately, it was all the performances ran very smoothly.
It was fine. It was fine.
It was, of all the shows we've done, it's that metaphor of the graceful swan gliding across a lake with the legs paddling furiously underneath. The backstage of Lost in Time was a performance in itself, because we had to, as soon as the audience were out of one space, we had to go in, clear props. We had a time machine, which John North made, this fantastic prop that appeared at the end, but we wanted it to appear in a room you'd already been in. So the very first room, which I think was called the Hartwell room,
the one with all the paintings.
Yes, and as soon as they'd gone upstairs and were up on the upper level and out of the way and couldn't see anything, we then had to leg it to the van out the front where we'd got the time machine stored, take it out, put it in the room ready, because the audience were then going to come down the stairs, walk past the same area. So we had to be really fast with setting it all up. But it was great fun, and the reaction was brilliant from the audiences. They really enjoyed it.
And there were lots of little bits whereby we would either have to hide around the corner to listen for your cue or something, and then either burst in or time it as if you were walking down the corridor, as if to meet the rest of the audience coming in the opposite direction. And there'd be lots of just ducking out of sight, going, are they on their way? Are they coming? Can I go? No? Right? Okay. Trying to get all of those timings. And I think there was one with a sword fight that took place across an open doorway. So it was like halfway through a fight that we just kind of...
Yes, that was with Matt, wasn't it? It's the Saxon.
Yeah. And we're kind of there, and we're waiting, and then someone else would be standing in another part of the building that we could see, who would then frantically wave at us, and it'd be like, then we'd fight, and then we'd go past this doorway and then disappear, and then somebody else would have to shut a door so that we could disappear to another part of the building. And
never has a clipboard been so
crazy.
Needed backstage. I had so many notes of where I needed to go between each bit, who to cue and who to tell is clear and who to get into position.
Yeah, because I think most people who were in it were, apart from obviously Erika and Hannah, were playing multiple characters or in multiple places. Because even me and John, who were just playing the robbers, we had to sort of start off in one place. What you thought was us running away from the professor was actually us running round to go and get the time machine.
Yeah, help set it up.
And then sort of, go in, help set it up, check that the audience have gone, run over to the stairs, make sure you're ready for them to, accidentally eavesdrop on you. As soon as they've gone, you're running round to the garden. And everyone was doing something like that. Obviously, Erika was doing all the time from one place to another, almost like a magic trick. It was, you would... run off in one direction and then appear from somewhere you had no right to be that quickly. But that was the whole point, that it had to appear almost magical in this way that you popped up.
Yeah, there are some great photos, I presume they must be Angela's, of what was going on backstage, of like Rob just sort of lingering around at the top of a staircase as Henry VIII, because he wasn't sure when the audience were coming, he couldn't hear them, so he was just kind of ambling around. And it was so fun, because I wasn't following the group of the audience. I was just sort of coming and going and getting stuff set up, and it was the beautiful chaos of just sort of standing there and then seeing Queen Victoria running past up a flight of stairs because she had to get dressed. It was Lara getting changed into Anne Boleyn and people, Alistair sort of storming around as his Roman centurion, then legging it because he had to get changed into a cavalier costume upstairs. There were quite a lot of strategically placed piles of clothes that the audience never saw, where actors had gotten changed quickly in a corner and then run out with their next bit. It was really good fun.
But yeah, to get that timing and that logistics working really well at the same time as keeping it interactive, because so much of it was like a quiz or getting an audience involved or a joke-telling competition, you could never be exactly sure of the timings. So it was a bit of a mission to make sure that everyone knew when to sort of release the audience to the next bit.
And the other thing that's worth noting, and Erika alluded to with the whiteboard, is we never rehearsed in the space until the day that we did the first performance, because we couldn't tally up with the museum. They were closed on Sundays, which is when we rehearsed, or occasionally evenings. So the first time a lot of the actors had seen where we were going to be and how it would work was when we were actually there. So I remember rehearsals were quite fun, because we were trying to make the Limelight a little bit like the museum. We were using stage blocks and panels and things to try and replicate some of the layouts of the rooms. And as you say, we had the whiteboard, which had one route for where the audience would be going through, and then separate routes for where Erika had to go at any given time, and how Lara would then move from one space to another to get ready for her next scene, and where Alistair would go. For something that did come across as a really just fun, not a particularly complex story, it's a really good bit of honest fun. It was such a complex thing, weirdly, and a lot of costumes, a lot of different time periods to cover, a lot of different characters. So it was a big old project, and amazing to think that we started work on the script end of January, early February, and we were on at the start of May. It was an incredible turnaround.
And I remember we even had a mini fight, well, two really mini fight sequences in there as well. We had sort of the scuffle between the robbers and the professor at the start, which, although it wasn't this long, complicated routine, there was a lot that needed to happen. Like the crystal needed to get from the professor to the robbers, I think, thrown between the two robbers, and then one kept out of the way while the other one was stolen. So that there was a lot of complexity in that. And again, the sort of the finale, as it were, was actually a surprisingly, complex little routine with sort of symmetry going on and people being thrown about, and you've then got the audience all surrounded in the sort of open garden space. So even that had a sort of, although it looked like a fun little, vignette, actually had a lot of planning going into it.
We had the garden chase in particular was almost regimented. I think in rehearsals we were standing in the limelight, and Dario was like, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, you come to there, you come to there, we all go round. And it was the choreo, it was like a dance almost. We all had to be regimented into this, and there was like a particular clockwise pattern that we were all doing or something, in order to make sure that the right characters were confronted by the other right characters at the same time. And yes, that was one of those things. And then there was the fight with you over the crystal, and I had the sword fight with Matt as the Saxon. Yeah, there was a lot going on.
Didn't we end up in the car park doing that finale sequence? I think we'd had no room left in the limelight. We'd filled
it was in the
it
garden.
with no, I meant when we were rehearsing.
Oh God, yes.
There was no room in the theatre. We were so full of
yes.
stage blocks and fake walls that we put up. We had to go into the car park and rehearse it. The things that our neighbours have seen over the years being rehearsed. Good bit of advertising. So what's everyone's sort of standout favourite bit of Lost in Time? Either a character or a sequence or a scene? Because mine's John Hampden.
Pointy man.
Yeah, it was the first joke right from the off. It's in those original notes, was that he's just always pointing at something. And Andy Faber was fantastic as Hampden. And it was a great cast. But I do have a soft spot for Hampden and the prof having a little bit of a flirt as well.
Oh.
I think the sort of fight sequence in the finale, again, was just sort of doing that was so much fun, because it was this fast-paced, fun thing that you're doing, but at the same time, it's not something you get a chance to do that often. Is something that is quite choreographed. So it was a good change as an actor to do something like that as well.
Lara striding out onto the lawn as Queen Victoria and then flicking her fan like some kind of ninja.
There's that photo online.
And then she just kind of...
Yeah, she looks so badass. She's got the fan out like a weapon.
She looks amazing. Exactly. And I can't remember what her line was or something. It was possibly something like, it might even have been the immortal, "We are not amused." But yeah, she just kind of came... all of the other characters that the Professor has met comes running out to help her, and the robbers are there. And I just remember, Lara kind of coming out and flicking this fan, looking like some kind of kick-ass ninja, and then she delivers this line, and then there's just this wicked little glint in the corner of her eye. That was wonderful. And yes, the flirting with John Hampden, there might have been a little bit more than the original script intended with that, as Andy and I worked on those scenes, and we kind of developed a little bit of a relationship for those characters with that. And we just decided to flirt outrageously with each other at any opportunity we got, really, on those.
Because the Professor's, the fact that she is reduced to a kind of girlish giggle every time he points at something is just fantastic. And the fact that Andy kind of turned John Hampden, who's an important figure and stately individual, into this rather sort of
he was a bit of a rake.
urbane, rather rakish, flirt. I think it was really. I didn't get to see that scene in the performance because that's when we were setting up the time machine. But I really enjoyed rehearsing that one.
And of course, the relationship between the Professor and John Hampden blooms further in the yet to be performed Laws of Time that is coming up as soon as we are physically able to do so.
Yes, it was. I said earlier, we thought it was maybe a one-shot deal doing Lost in Time, so we poured as many historical figures as we could into it. But it was a huge success, if we say so ourselves. The feedback was phenomenal. I remember Ruth giving us a bit of paper where we used to sit in the town council chamber between performances, and where we got ready. It was our dressing room. And she gave us this printout of all the comments they'd received from the feedback survey or on Facebook about the play, and it was incredible. And so when we wrapped up, we had a great time. We were really pleased with it, and it was deemed to have really gone well as a success. And Ruth then started talking about, shall we do another one? And which we said yes, absolutely. And the hunt was already for where do you go next, because you don't want to go back to the same venue. Once you've done it. You want to move on. And I remember very early on in Lost in Time, Ruth and I were talking about historical venues and where we might go, and both of us thought the courthouse in Aylesbury Market Square would be an incredible place to go and perform. What an amazing space to put on a play. But at the time, I think because the turnaround was so fast, there was no way we could get in there, and the museum was a much better bet for kicking the whole thing off. But we then revisited it and said, well, can we do it? And Ruth went away and had all the conversations and worked out who to talk to and arranged it, and then got us the venue, and we started work. And it is, sadly, it's one of the projects that's had to go on hold for a fair old while whilst COVID is ongoing, but there's a lot of goodwill on all sides to revive it. But as we said, it's a bit more of a mystery, isn't it? It's a bit more of a character piece. We don't want to give too much away, because obviously it's still incoming. But yes, John Hampden makes another appearance as a little cameo, and we do discover that they've kept in touch. So what can we sort of tease people with about Laws of Time? Erika, what are you looking forward to when we do get around to performing it?
Oh, I think you might end up by seeing a little bit of a different side of the Professor. With some of the characters that she gets to meet. She's definitely got her fun side, but there's a lot of anger as well that brims under the surface, and also I think her own past catches up with her as well a little bit. I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, really.
Yeah, and I think the setting for it being in the courthouse building essentially. I think that lends itself to so many interesting things happening and so many potentials for plot points to revolve around that as well, that it's just a brilliant location, and then the things you can do with it really, are going to make it quite a special story, really.
Yes.
If I can say that without giving too much away.
Yes, and still we are on our educational and informative remit, because we've got lots of real life cases that we're either heard or sentenced at Aylesbury Crown Court. So that's quite exciting. That's been quite interesting research, also quite grim, quite scary research. But looking forward to telling people, including some very funny ones. It doesn't sound like it would be funny, but there's some rather bizarre crimes that have been heard over the years in Aylesbury Crown Court, which we can't wait for people to find out about, including one about a pie. That's all I'll say.
Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely still got a real sense of fun and a lot of funny, great fun moments in the script. But it's definitely more on the heavier side. This one,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, it's still got that adventure element. There's a story, but it is more of a mystery, I think, isn't it? There's more of a plot to unravel.
It's a mystery thriller, isn't it?
And equally, you get to see a part of Aylesbury you probably don't get to see any other time of the year. So, yes, fingers crossed. Once COVID is past and we can get back, we will be bringing that to you. But in the meantime, obviously, the Professor has had quite the history through lockdowns and
yes,
with the audios, which was I say unexpected, and
because that's how it started.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it started, because Laws of Time was postponed, lockdown happened, and wait, how did it switch to audio? Did you just sort of think about, that's what I want to do, I've got an idea to write it? Or?
It was an odd one. It wasn't a conscious. Some of the projects we did where we need some content, what can we do? So the sonnets were our immediate response. Doing a sonnet a day was, we need content, we want to do it quickly, what can we get going? But the Chronomier, the first book, it was only, it envisaged as a one-off really to begin with, the Tudor Assassin, it's one of those bits of writing or one of those ideas that's sort of in your head and won't leave you alone. And it wasn't a plan for a specific book or a specific project. It was just the description that's in the prologue. That whole sequence, the image of a row of houses in Victorian London, and one of them is a bit more bohemian with a scruffy front door and strange plants growing in the window boxes, and there's lights flashing through the windows because something's going on inside. It was one of those bits of writing. Sometimes it's dialogue, sometimes it's a character, sometimes it's an image that won't leave you alone in a sense. You just have to sit down and write them. So I didn't write it as specifically let's do a prologue of an audiobook, because just I need to write that. It's clearly there, it needs to be written. And then it kept going, and it was really fun, particularly the first few chapters of that first book. They're quite freestanding in a sense. They're what's happening with the Professor, where's she going, and the plot kicks in once she arrives in Tudor England. And it was a bit of a leap into the unknown really, because I hadn't written prose for over 10 years, I think, since uni. But it was a bit of an experiment just to see, well, there seems to be something in my head that wants to leak out onto the page. And eventually thought, well, actually, no, I think this is an audiobook. And then I got in touch with you, and did I send you it originally, just a bit of it, or was it? I can't remember now.
I think you did sent me bits of it.
Yeah,
and
probably the prologue, I think.
Yeah. And I think, didn't I record you the prologue and send it back to you, just kind of say, well, this is how I would do it.
Yes.
Do you want to carry on?
And then I kind of carried on, because I must admit, I'll be honest, when we were doing Tudor Assassin, exactly what happened in the plot didn't occur to me until as we were going. It was very much one of those, you realise what the story's about the more you write it, whereas I think all of the ones we've done subsequently, the other series have been planned out.
They've had a story arc.
Yeah, sort of plot breakdown.
But even to the point where, because I remember saying to you when I first got one of the early chapters, one of the first characters that the Professor meets when she goes back to Tudor London, is that there was a throwaway line about a thief. And then it took a couple more chapters, and this, what was originally, because I remember you saying this, was originally intended to be just a cut purse minor character, actually grew into a very prominent major player. And again, so the character of Astrid grew from this small character that you'd had to start with. And I remember you saying, Astrid wasn't meant to be in this one, and now she is.
We do that because we don't really go into backstory in Lost in Time, but I think there's possibly a hint in Lost in Time that she was from the same time as the Professor. We'd always been quite specific that the Professor is an inventor. She's not superhuman or an alien. She is a human who invented a time machine and went off to explore. And I think the inference was that Astrid was possibly from the same time and had come along with her. So when I started writing Tudor Assassin, there was no plan that Astrid would be in it from the beginning, and I always knew in my head the Professor invented a time machine, went off to explore on her own initially, and I thought that it would be about her, and then it just seemed right to put her in. But I think it's a very different character, actually. I think the Professor is quite different from Lost in Time to the audiobooks. She's certainly got a lot more depth when we've gone back in her history. Astrid, I have to say, I see and hear a very different character to Lost in Time, because she's a lot more... In Lost in Time, she's got that slightly panto-y enthusiasm of, come on, boys and girls, we're off on an adventure. She's that character. She's there to kind of G up the audience. Whereas in the audiobooks, she's a bit more sarcastic, and she's a bit more feisty and a bit more rough and tough, I think. Particularly, I think it'll have been announced by the time this comes out, but in the fourth series, the fourth story that's on the way, she changes a lot. And it wasn't the plan to put her in there, but I just think she's quite a different character. I think if you'd seen Lost in Time and heard the audiobook, you'd think that she's developed quite a lot. But that was one of the unexpected things. And when I started writing, I don't think I knew Kristen Marlowe was going to be in it. There wasn't a plot really until she arrived, and you thought, well, now there's got to be a plot. It's just kind of fun. The best bits of writing the Professor are those scenes or those chapters where she's on her own, going around and exploring, and you're inside her head rather than her conveying ideas through Astrid or another character.
But since then, there have been lots, and as the rest of the story arcs have sort of been planned out, there are lots of different threads that connect the plays and all of the audio adventures as well. There are threads around them. Like, for example, there's a throwaway line that Astrid had in Lost in Time when she talks about William Shakespeare. And again, she refers to the Professor flirting with Shakespeare, and the fact that the Dark Lady of the sonnets is referring to the Professor. And the Professor meets the William Shakespeare in the Tudor Assassin, and I still remember that scene. There's a wonderful scene where she just literally giggles at him and can't talk to him when she first meets him. She goes, "You're William Shakespeare,"
yes,
and just kind of descends into this girliness, just like with John Hampden. And in the one that I'm working on at the moment, there is another very, very throwaway reference to William Shakespeare. When I read that script, I think I laughed, and I think I messaged you going, "This is getting a bit cheeky, isn't it?"
Yes,
and you very innocently went back and went, "Yes." The offstage flirtations carrying on.
There was an idea maybe that she'd go back and meet him again in maybe one of the little short stories we've done, like the Home for Christmas. And then when I wrote that one, there's a scene in the upcoming fourth story where she references him again. I thought, actually, it's really, what a great running gag is that you never see anything, you never see them meet again, but you just get these references to what on earth she's been up to. That she occasionally sneaks back to go and have a weekend with Will. So I think it's all the more funny for being unexplored, but reference to the fact that she's clearly got a bit of a connection with him.
I love it. I found it hilarious. It's wonderful. It's wonderful, and I can see these little threads, and even the fact that the prologue that you wrote for the Tudor Assassin in some ways becomes connected to, again, can't really say very much.
No.
Laws of Time as well.
Yes, there is a plot brewing. I mean, if anyone's been listening to the Chronicles from the beginning, has listened to all three of them and the fourth one coming, there's a plot that's unfolding. There's a kind of an ongoing story arc, which does link with Laws of Time. Whether it links back in the same way, I think we'll probably reuse a lot of the characters and the situations, but it might be framed slightly differently, because the plays and the audiobooks, I think, exist in a slightly different world to one another.
It's almost like we've got our own multiverse.
You've got, I think, the Chronicles of Professor Chronomier as the audio series is, to me, that's her life story, and those are not to say one's definitive or not, but that's sort of the core of it, I think, weirdly, although it came afterwards. And the plays are sort of wonderful adaptations, taking bits from the mythology that's been building up, that will then present them to an audience in a more, I say, interactive way and a more participatory way. So they're different, I think, in tone, and their style is a little different. So they exist slightly differently, but there's always going to be crossover. So yes, I think at some point some plot elements from this mystery that's unfolding in with Laws of Time will find its way into the audio series as well. There's a tale being told that we're heading towards. With series 4, you find out a little bit more what's going on, and then there will be further stories with there's a big finish coming up.
I mean, for me personally, because Laws of Time was obviously written and created by the pair of you, and I had my script at the time, and I'd read it, and the story that was in Laws of Time, I would definitely say that there were certain lines in that script that have essentially informed what has become the kernel of the Professor, if I'm perfectly honest. And there's a scene, and there are some lines within that script that I then took on board. And it was like, right, okay, so this is who the Professor is, and it's that version that I have essentially grown, if you like, with the audiobooks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's such a strange genesis, isn't it? That she started out as these two scripts, one still to be staged and completed. As you say, the script exists, it's there, and I think we were weeks away from starting rehearsals actually before lockdown came in, and then it spun off into this audio series, which is very clearly influenced, particularly from Laws of Time, in terms of setting up her character and her biography. And although some of the details are a bit different, I think, I think it is a slightly different version in a way, the audios to the stage versions. Yeah. There's absolutely that through line. You wouldn't have the audiobooks if it wasn't for the two plays. But it's lovely that the audio version has kind of blossomed in its own way and has come up with its own mythology now, and that's developing all the time. But certainly that I think the hope is from all of us that we'll still get to do the stories as plays as well. Not necessarily the same stories. I think there'll always be a slightly different tone to the performances because there's that interactive element. But it's very unexpected, but it's become a sort of staple of Unbound, hasn't it, really?
Yeah. And it's interesting what you're saying about the two different sort of portrayals is I do find that when I'm thinking about stage Professor as opposed to audio Professor, there is a bit of a distinction between them, and it's almost as you said with the character of Astrid, there is almost a lot of more pantomime where the Professor is talking directly to a modern audience and again trying to guide them through these locations that we get to go and see, and cracking jokes. Even going back to Lost in Time, I think one of my favourite jokes was something about I made an Annika Rice gag, which parents of a certain age got and tittered, and all the kids were like staring at me going, what the hell are you going on about? But yeah, I was always pleased when my Annika Rice treasure hunt gag, showing my age there, got a couple of knowing smiles, groans or titters from older members of the audience on that one. So yeah, there is a very definite there's a difference between how I would portray both the characters, but the essence of them is the essence of her is still very much there in both. Because
she has popped up elsewhere, hasn't she, Prof? We revived her for the 5th anniversary show. There's a little reprise of something from Lost in Time, and she did. We can say this now because it's out there. The spoilers have been negated. She pops up in the Inspector Murder Christmas special.
Oh, that was lovely to do. That was
As
so
the Ghost
lovely
of Christmas
to
Yet
do.
to Come was again not something I think we ever expected to happen, but it just seemed right at the time. And I remember recording that because we had you and Alistair in the same recording studio doing that scene, and it is a bit like two bits of my brain having a conversation.
But I remember sitting directly opposite Alistair in the booths, and it was right at the end of the scenes, and he looks over at me and he goes, "Merry Christmas, Professor Chronomier." And I looked back at him and I went, "Merry Christmas, Inspector Murder." And the pair of us, we just kind of caught each other's eye and just had like this little, it was such a lovely smile. There was genuine warmth there, and the feel in the recording studio, everyone else went, "Oh," and it was lovely. It was lovely to be able to play that.
It's like a little Christmas present, isn't it? And it's very fitting because between the Professor and the Inspector, those two characters have been at the heart of quite a lot of what we've been doing through the first lockdown, and then when we got back together and we were able to be in a studio together, and then since we've gone back into lockdown. So very fitting, and especially for you and Alistair, who are so synonymous that we'd never have anyone else playing those parts. They're so attached, the two of you. It was a nice way to end the year.
So looking to the future,
Yes.
Gareth and Dario, what other adventures is the Professor likely to go on?
Well,
What other adventures or thoughts have you got planned?
Well, obviously, as you said, Laws in Time, we want to make sure we can remount that and pick up where we left off, hopefully once restrictions allow. And I'm sure the audio adventures will carry on in some way. I think that's a nice thing to just sort of have as part of the ongoing programme, even when lockdowns have lifted. It's a nice thing. But beyond that, there are some plans and some ideas for what we might do with the Prof. We sort of can't say anything yet because it's all up in the air. I mean, it would be lovely to carry on doing the plays for the town council, wouldn't it? They're such fun, and the town council are great to work for, and Ruth's been fantastic. But I don't know where else we'd go. We'd have to. They're always Aylesbury history based, the ones for the town council, so we'll have to think of other venues or other stories. I'm not too sure.
Well, there's one by the canal, Tides of Time.
Tides of Time, yes.
Tides of Time.
We've hampered ourselves now with the titles.
Aylesbury on Sea, we're going to do Sands of Time.
Oh, very good. Very good. In fact, cut that out of the podcast. We shall do that.
So basically, my entire future theatrical career now is based on how many puns Gareth can get out of time, so that the Professor can keep going.
Yes. That's how we work. Gareth comes up with a pun of the title. I then sort of go and find a venue, and then we sit down together and write it. No, I don't know. I mean, there's probably more to be gotten out of the Civil War. I think Aylesbury's got a history with the Civil War. There's the Battle of Aylesbury, which is we touched upon in Lost in Time.
The March of Time.
March of Time. Yes, there you go. Do that. I think it would be quite fun to extrapolate some of the stories, because Lost in Time was so many different strands together as a first go. Maybe to revisit, it'd be fun to go back and find out more about Anne Boleyn.
Get more use out of the Henry VIII costume.
Yes, get our money's worth. Got to
the infamous
that
Henry
could be
VIII
called
outfit.
Ahead of Time.
Well, I mean, that's the next few years sorted, isn't it?
Nailed that.
So yes, and I hope we get to keep doing them. They are a lot of fun, and the interactive ones. And there's some thoughts about maybe something that's not necessarily interactive version, more of a traditional play. We've got some ideas we like to follow, but I say it's all up in the air, and emails are being written, and projects are being put forward. So I certainly think that the Professors, I hope, will always be around in some shape or form, whether it's audio or stage. But
it should be my pleasure to continue playing her, definitely.
Could set one in a pub, time at the bar.
10 p.m.
Last
curfew.
orders. And is there any particular period in history that either of you would like to explore, or a favourite time, or something that, without restrictions, you would just go, yeah, let's do this. I'd love to set it on a Viking ship or something like that. I don't know.
I mean, we've done a few things with pirates, but pirates are just fun, aren't they? I'd love to do something on the high seas. Would be exciting, wouldn't it? Difficult in Buckinghamshire, we're landlocked, but you know.
I mean, I have a particular affinity for ancient history, but it doesn't really fit in with sort of any locations around Aylesbury. So
no, but I think if we were moving further afield, if we were putting her anywhere, something, Egyptology is a great playground to play in as writers.
Yeah,
I mean, I'd love this. Is if you could do anything, how brilliant would it be to sort of upscale something like Lost in Time to somewhere like the British Museum, and go around somewhere like that. It would be lovely to kind of find other heritage venues and other spaces that have got a story to tell, and you can use the Professor to tell that. But yeah, I think pirates or Egyptology, there's plenty of it. I mean, and what's nice, particularly with Laws of Time, was even for us as writers, was discovering stories we didn't know. Any venue, I think, with a story throws up something, and it's just really fun to turn them into stories, the fictionalized stories that you can still learn something from. It's been great fun to learn stuff as well as to write it.
Well, I hope to continue playing the Professor for many more years to come. I shall grow into her infamous white hair. So it remains for me to thank very much Dario and Gareth, not only for joining me this afternoon, but also for creating an absolutely fantastic and memorable character in all of your stories. So thank you both very, very much. And please do listen again next time.
And bravo for playing her, Erika.
Yes, bravo.
Thank you.
Yes. Job well done, Prof.
Thank you, sir.